The FAA has finally filed a response right on time, right at the last hour, as the lawyers are
Naturally.
keen to do. The FAA has filed a response to Race Day Quad's remote ID lawsuit, and we're going to take a look at that and kind of summarize it for you. I don't know if we
Yeah.
want to kind of give them the brief, the overview of, but essentially they're like, "Hey, you're wrong."
Well, I mean, people are looking at this and going, I'm trying to scroll through it and show people it. People are reading this brief and going, oh, Race Day Quads is lost. And I feel like it's important to say that that's what a lawyer's job is to do. They go,
Sure.
This other guy is like the scene from My Cousin Vinny where he goes, everything that other guy said is BS. That's what the FAA has done here. It doesn't necessarily mean they win.
Yes.
Or are winning.
Yeah. Yeah, I think they bring up a couple of interesting points. Yeah, I figured maybe we could run through those real quick.
Yeah.
So the first one, a big one, is that the FAA is conducting unreasonable search. So that was like the big thing that everybody talked about, the Fourth Amendment violation of like, hey, you're intruding on our rights because it's an unreasonable search to be like showing where we are and displaying our locations and avoiding our privacy. So the FAA basically replied and said that we consider it like a digital license plate. So essentially that like, there's not much more there because some layman can't do anything other than just like they came with a license plate. They just get a value, and then they have to put that in a database to actually get information out of it. The other thing they said was that like there is no expectation. They basically cited a bunch of case law, and they think that they're based on their case law that they cited. There's no real expectation of privacy for an airplane, and so that would also apply to a UAS. And then the other big,
and that's the kind of thing where if you're not a lawyer, it's very hard for, and we're not even going to try to judge whether that's a valid argument or what the likelihood is that they'll prevail there. I certainly read that one. Oh no, there's no expectation of privacy in the sky. Oh, well, why didn't the expensive professional lawyers that Tyler hired think of these things? And then I was like, wait a minute, they probably did.
Yeah, they did. They had different case law, and FAA was like, that case law isn't what you think it is. It was basically like, it was like 2 sentences. It's like, we don't agree with that. So, and then basically they said, even if it comes to term that we did commit a search and that it is a search and it is a violation of your privacy, we think it falls under the special needs exception to the Fourth Amendment. And so there's a special exception that's been used in multiple cases for the Fourth Amendment that says in special cases, we can violate your Fourth Amendment rights essentially because XYZ, you know. We need to track this. We need to do this. We need to do this. You can't be expected to be private here, even though you think you should. So now there's an exception for it.
So basically, I mean, there's this special needs exception, which basically means that the government can say, no, we really need to violate your Fourth Amendment rights.
Yes.
And then what do? You sue them and you say, nah. And then the court decides.
So one thing is like, for example, you can go through a sobriety checkpoint, but you don't have to be like actually shown that you have suspicion to be checked for sobriety at a sobriety checkpoint. That's what the point of the sobriety checkpoint is. And they upheld that in court before based on a special needs exemption of the Fourth Amendment. And then in other cases, put down other checkpoints based on local laws and things. So it's obviously not like cut and dry, but that's just an example of a case where special needs has been used before.
Yeah. So, the post is up there, and by the way, a link to the brief is in the show notes down below. So if you want to check that out and read that, be my guest. I've seen some people who are discouraged by this, and I would say that if you read if you are not a lawyer who is practiced in this area, and you read Race Day Quad's brief, and you went, "Wow, this is a great argument. We are going to just smoke this one." You have no basis to make that judgment. And if you read the FAA's brief and you go, oh my God, we're screwed, you also have no basis to make that. So what's going to happen next is, I believe Race Day Quads has the ability to file one more brief to go, nah, and then either it'll go to oral arguments, or is that not even guaranteed?
Yeah, I don't think it's guaranteed. It might be because this is like challenging a federal rule. So maybe there's like a special thing that always goes to oral arguments. I know there's different time frames for like how like critical the case is and stuff too. So, but I believe it will either go to oral arguments or the court will just decide. But basically, RDQ gets one time back to say like, here's all the reasons what you said doesn't apply to what we said originally, and here's how we're going to end it. And then the court will get together and decide. And just so for people who haven't ever seen one of these opinions, this will be one of those things where the court will get together and decide, and then, you know, all the judges don't necessarily have to agree. So you may see like, here's the majority opinion, here's what we're going with, here's dissenting opinions, here's like similar opinions. So we may not even get like a hard, clear-cut thing out of this. We may get like, here's how it'll end up, but also like these three judges disagree, that sort of thing.
Yeah, but we will get it. There will be a judgment at the end of the day.
Yes, there will be
a judgment, and we will know. Yeah. So also bear in mind that Res de Quads intentionally made many arguments, any one of which could be successful and could have a positive result. So, like, some people are saying that they feel the Fourth Amendment argument is really weak. And Res de Quads also, in the interview I did with Tyler and Jonathan, said, well, we kind of expect them to try to avoid ruling on the Fourth Amendment thing, because they are really hesitant to strike down the Fourth Amendment. So if the FAA has a good argument here, you know, hopefully they don't have good responses to every single point Res de Quads raised. But time will tell.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I guess the other big thing I just want to mention real quick was like their overarching idea here, which is interesting, is just that a lot of people have talked about requirements for safety and doing safety, you know, checks and documentation and stuff to make sure that like there's a reason to even regulate this stuff. And from my reading into this, which is obviously like we just talked about, it's their side of it, right? But their kind of stance here seems to be like, hey, Congress told us to do this. And the entire time we kept telling Congress what we were doing and going back and forth with Congress, with their different organizations about like, hey, here's what we're doing and how we're doing it. And they were cool with that the whole time. And we followed all the rules. So like, I'm not sure how all that will play out and who has jurisdiction over what, but it certainly seems like Congress was like, hey, you need to do this by tracking these things. So here's your job. And now they're saying we're just following those guidelines.
Well, and
it's interesting, you know?
we had this conversation a little bit before the stream, so I don't want to, if it sounds like we've talked about this before, it's because we have. But my thought was, if Congress says that a federal agency must do something, they must accomplish some goal. Like, for example, let's say Congress said that there must be clean drinking water. Okay, right, whatever. And now we're going to create federal regulations that accomplish that goal. There is still a rulemaking process and a structural sort of framework within which you do that. You can't just say anyone who pollutes the drinking water will be shot. Yeah. Whoa, well, Congress told us to do it, so it must be fine. Now, I'm not, obviously that's a little reductionist, but I'm not sure why their claim that Congress told them to do it changes the claims Res de Quads made about the fact that they didn't follow the process.
It seems like they didn't say like, hey, your job is to make sure that the skies are safe from UAS. It seems like from reading the documentation, they said, make sure the skies are safe from UAS by tracking the location and identification of remote pilots, operators, and unmanned aircraft. Yeah. And so to me, like, it's like saying, you know, ensure clean drinking water by shooting anyone who pollutes the drinking water.
I see the distinction you're making.
Yeah. So I don't know. Again, like, do they even have the right to say that to the FAA? Like, you know what I mean? I don't know any of that part of stuff. But that seems to be like a general stance they're talking about in the document.
I mean, you could certainly get a law declared unconstitutional as well as a federal regulation. So I think that's not the approach that Res de Quad seems to have taken. But yeah, it is different. If Congress says, do this by doing this other thing, if Congress said you must track the location of remote controlled aircraft in U.S. airspace, then that's different than if they just said, make the airspace safe. And the FAA was like, I know, let's track everything.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what the rebuttal is. And then we'll definitely be following that in the case that ensues. So
yeah. I asked Tyler if he had any statement. Obviously, this just came out today. And he said basically the team is working on it. He still feels they have a strong case, but didn't have any particular statement that he wanted to make in response. Obviously, their response brief will be their statement.